Shalom Aleichem. Hilchot Deot B'Sefer HaMadar Rabbeinu Hagadol Rambam. Let us begin again from the beginning of the Perek. Hameragel b'haviro. He who spreads information, rumors, and stories about a fellow Jew, over belo ta'aseh, transgresses a mitzvot lo ta'aseh, a negative commandment. Shene'emar lo telech rochil ba'amecha. We pointed out last time the word rochil, rechiluth, in the word we have the word rechiluth in modern Hebrew as well. Rechiluth is rumors and all manner of conveying information about people, usually behind their back. Rechiluth, rochil is connected to the shoresh l'rochil, l'ragel, which is both what we're discussing here, why the Rambam uses this pa'al, this verb, hameragel b'haviro. It also means to spy out. A spy is a meragel, because his purpose is to go about, glean information, and pass it on. And this has to do with the feet. This has to do with moving about, going from place to place, walking from place to place with one's feet, and therefore a spy is a meragel, and therefore the gimel and the chaf interchange, which happens frequently. Keep in mind that a kaf, the kaf, k sound, and the gimel sound both are formed from the same place, the back of the palate, and the same is true of the fricative, the softer version. The kaf refuya, chaf, and the gimel refuya, which is a rimel. Rimel and chaf are pronounced in a very similar manner, not identical. That is why we also pointed out that an itinerant salesman who goes from place to place selling his wares is called rochel, because he travels, he goes about and offers his wares for sale. And this is what this Mishvat Lo Ta'aseh discusses. Lo telech rochil ba'amecha. Do not be that kind of person who goes about, picks up information, likes to tell stories about others behind their back. And why does the Torah say this is so hamur, so serious? Rambam says, and even though this does not involve malkuyoth, one cannot be whipped for doing so by the Beth Din. It is a great sin. It's a very great sin. And it can lead literally to bloodshed. And that is why in the Torah we find juxtaposed to this pasuk the words Lo ta'amod al dam re'echa, do not stand idly by when your fellow Jew's life is in danger. We mentioned last time we mentioned last time that Do'er ha'adomi was the person who informed Shaul HaMelech, King Saul, that the Kohanim in the city of Kohanim, town of Kohanim called Nov, had provided some sustenance to David HaMelech and his men who were fugitives, fleeing from Shaul, who wished to kill them. And this resulted in Shaul, who was no longer in control of himself, as the Mishneh states, that kin'ah, jealousy, is one of the things that is musi'at ha'adam min ha'olam, removes a person literally from the world. In other words, turns them into a monster, literally. Derails them in terms of normative, acceptable behavior. Shaul went and killed all these people, all the people of Nov. Ezehu Rachid, Rambam says now, this is Halacha Beth. Here I'm sharing the screen with you now. Halacha Beth. Ezehu Rachid. Zeshahu Tu'in Davarim. This refers to someone who picks up information. Holech mizeh lazeh ve'omer kach v'chach amar peloni, and then relates it to others and says, so and so said this. Kach v'chach shemati al peloni. I heard the following with regards to so and so. Even though everything that he is relating is true, he's not lying. This kind of behavior literally destroys the fabric of human society. Excuse me. It is necessary to point out that when dealing with a person who aims to harm people, such as, let's say, some kind of confidence trickster, let's say a person is going around asking people for sadaqah, for charity, and he may even present some documentation, which people never bother to read, of course. Who has time to read every piece of paper thrust in your face, particularly if it happens to be during Shemona Esrei, which is, of course, the time when it's asur for that person to do such a thing, and he is being mahatiyat harabim, he is causing the many to sin. So a person may be some kind of fraud. Unfortunately, such things are not unknown by any means. And to warn people about this fact, to inform people that they not fall into this person's, will not be entrapped by him and not give him money and not believe him, that is mutar. If it is clear to you that this is the case, it is mutar to do so. This is not rechilot, this is not Lashon HaRa. This is in fact a miswah to do so. or to assist the Beit Din in apprehending wrongdoers, evildoers, people who endanger others, etc. That is all mutar. Halacha Gimel, Rambam says, Yesh arwon gadol mizeh az ma'od. There is an isur which is even more serious. You would think that it would be difficult to come up with something much more serious than this, which, as Rambam just said a moment ago, gorem laharov nefashot rabot miYisrael, can definitely lead literally to bloodshed, even large-scale bloodshed. Nevertheless, there is a greater avera, but of a similar nature. It is included within the purview of this mitzvah lo ta'aseh. Lashon HaRa. This is known as Lashon HaRa. Hamasaper birnut havero. He who speaks ill of another Jew. Even though he's speaking the truth. So the difference between the chiluf, between he was meragel b'haviro and Lashon HaRa, is that the first doesn't have to even be doesn't have to necessarily be negative in its import. But the very fact that people constantly discuss and relate and broadcast information about others, and that he so and so said this and he said that and he intends to do such and such, and he expressed this opinion, we know that this leads to this can have very serious outcomes in terms of interpersonal relationships and society as a whole. But that doesn't necessarily have to be of a negative nature. Here we're discussing Lashon HaRa, which is speaking ill of another, pointing out that he is not terribly clever, or that he tends to do such and such, which is not a good thing. Again, unless it's being said in the context of warning a person or giving them an eitzah tova, giving them good advice, so that they will not be injured, not be harmed, or taken in some way. So this is Lashon HaRa. Even though what he says is entirely true. However, he who actually speaks the opposite of truth, he who speaks lies. This has a separate, is defined as a separate category. It's called Musi Shem Ra al Haviro. He who disseminates evil, negative opinion, a negative opinion about so and so, and it's not true, in fact. In other words, they're slandering this person and making things up about him. That's Musi Shem Ra al Haviro. Avar Ba'al Lashon HaRa Zeh Sheyoshev Hu Omer Kach V'Chach Asa Peloni. However, your regular garden type Ba'al Lashon HaRa, who just sits around and likes to talk and spin tales and stories, and says so and so did this, and you know he comes from such and such a family, that they used to be this way or that way or what have you. And I once heard such and such about him. And in general, things of a negative nature, the kinds of things that he would not wish others to say about him. May Hashem cut off all those who speak literally smoothly, that is to say, they speak in a manner which is calculated to interest people in what they say, and they like hearing the sound of their own voices, and they like the fact that other people sit around listening to them and all their stories. This is one of their main sources of pleasure. So the pasuk speaks harshly of such people. May Hashem cut off and cut down all those who speak in such a way, who act and behave in this manner. These words imply people who like to tell tales and gain people's interest and therefore make themselves the center of attention. There is a tremendous amount of ga'awah, of haughtiness involved with this terrible practice of Lashon HaRa. As Rabbi Avraham ibn Ezra points out in his Perush, the beginning of Sefer Tehillim, speaking about Lethim, often translated as scoffers, scorners, and that's another discussion. But what exactly the essential meaning of that shoresh, lethon, of leth is, but it definitely there's no question that lethim involve themselves and habitually in talking and discussing and but of course empty things. That's why the pasuk there at the beginning of Tehillim says, "Uv moshav lethim lo yashav." They sit around in groups and they schmooze. And they don't schmooze about positive things. And Rabbi Avraham ibn Ezra points out in the pasuk that, from the pasuk, I should say, that the lesim, those referred to in the pasuk there as lesim, are the opposite of anawim. And we see this clearly in the pasuk in Mishneh, Perek Gimel. Perhaps I will call this up on the screen. In Mishneh, can you see Mishneh on the screen? Mishneh Perek Gimel, at the end of the Perek, Pasuk Lamed Dalet, Im lalesim hu yalis, v'la anawim iten hen. So you see the Pasuk both juxtaposes, but also places on opposite ends of the scale these two types of people, those described as lesim, who speak a great deal. They like to speak, they like to talk, they like to hear all these stories and rumors and talk about people and what have you. Those people are the lesim. And anawim, which means people who are humble, who do not think the world of themselves, are the different kind, are the opposite from lesim. To speak Lashon HaRa about others, that you have to have a certain amount, at least, of ga'wa. You have to first think that I'm wonderful, or at least I'm pretty okay, and quite commendable, in fact, and worthy of praise. And I'm not like those people over there. And and therefore I can criticize and speak ill of and spread rumors about and cause others to think less of so and so. A person who is a truly humble person will not do this, because he knows that he himself is far from perfect. He knows that many people could find much fault with him, and they would not be wrong. They would be correct if they were to, in other words, they would be factually correct to point out these things. And knowing that he himself is far from perfect, and knowing that all human beings have their shortcomings, and knowing his own shortcomings and being fully aware of them, because a haughty person essentially has to hide from his own, from his view, himself. He has to hide himself from himself. He cannot really see himself as he is. He has to paint a certain picture of himself, which is not real, which is not factual. And then he feels himself raised on high. He's on a pedestal, and he can now judge everybody else, and he can express opinions about everybody else, and everybody else is very deserving, and they have it coming to them because they're not nearly as wonderful as he is. So there has to be an element of ga'awah in Lashon HaRa. So the very best defense against Lashon HaRa is anawah, is humility, and being aware of one's own shortcomings. If one sees himself in a true light, he will be much less inclined. Excuse me. He will be much less inclined to be a Baal Lashon HaRa.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Is the Isur of being Motzi Shem Ra included? It's not included in this law of Lo Telech Rachil Ba'amecha, right?
Why do you say that?
Well, in the beginning of Halacha Gimel, the Rambam says that Lashon HaRa is included in this law, and seemingly an exclusion to Motzi Shem Ra.
I do not believe it's to exclude Motzi Shem Ra. Motzi Shem Ra is Lashon HaRa on steroids. Lashon HaRa is Lashon HaRa. You're speaking ill of so and so, and it doesn't have to. It may not be at all untrue. It may be entirely correct and objectively true, but it's not your business to tell everybody about this, to broadcast this information, to put him down, to show him up, to cause people to think less of him. That's classic Lashon HaRa. Motzi Shem Ra al Havero is literally to make things up about some other person. This is, of course, how many journalists make a living. That's much of what they do. Not everybody is willing to make up stories and lies. They're happy just happy to simply point out the truth. That's sufficient for their purposes to cause other people to think less of this individual. They don't have to go to the bother of making up lies and stories. But some people will go even further. So I see it as an extension of Lashon HaRa, but it's even more serious. Rambam continues now in Halacha Daled or Gimel. You can see the screen, correct? אמרו חכמים על 3 עבירות נפרעים מן האדם בעולם הזה ואין לו חלק לעולם הבא. There are 3 avirot for which a person is punished in this world and has no halak l'olam haba. And they are Avodah Zarah, all manner of foreign worship, all manner of false religious belief and practice, V'rilui arayot, all manner of forbidden sexual behavior, Ushfichut damim, and bloodshed, killing people where it is not justified. When is it justified? For example, self-defense or in war. And Lashon HaRa keneged kulam. This 4th thing is added in order to, in connection with these other 3, in order to to make clear, to drive home how serious this Isur is. We find, just one second, I will quote something else to you. All right, so here we have the Mishneh, the beginning of the Sechet Pe'ah, which is usually recited in the morning after Birkat Torah. So we have the Mishnah, Elu Devarim she'en lahem shi'ur. These things have no specific shi'ur, there's not a specific amount or fixed way of performing this mitzvah in terms of the amount. HaPe'ah wa bikurim, this has to do with mitzvot to do with agriculture, with one's produce. Ayon, this has to do with the korban re'iyah, ugmilut hasad or hasadim, with Torah. All right, in other words, the more gemilut hasadim a person performs, the more Torah a person learns, the more sachar there is, the greater is the mitzvah that he is performing. It is not like, for example, eating a kazayat of masah, belela seder. Once you've eaten your kazayat of masah, you can eat as much masah as you wish after that, but there's no additional mitzvah involved in so doing. And the same is true of many mitzvot. Once you have blown the shofar of Rosh Hashanah, you've heard the requisite kolot, there's no purpose to do more than that, etc. These mitzvot are not so. Geminut hasadim, Talmud Torah, Pe'ah, Bikurim, Rayon, all these things, the more the merrier. That's the purpose, the aim of this, the beginning, the opening statement of this Mishnah. Then the Mishnah goes on to say, there are other things, other mitzvot. Elu devarim shadam ochem miperotehem ba'olam hazeh. There are mitzvot for which you are rewarded in this world, as it were, a kind of interest. You get some interest payment in this world. But the real payment, the main sachar, the main reward, is stored up for olam haba, and these are kibud av wa'im, respecting and treating and looking after one's parents, ugemilut hasadim. Again, the connection to Gemilut hasadim before. Wahavat shalom ben adam lahavero. This is interesting because it takes the act of excuse me, it takes the act of trying to bring to an end mahaloket, some strained relationship and some enmity between two Jews, to bring that to an end. That is a tremendous thing, because this is repairing the fabric of Jewish society. This is a very important thing. With Talmud Torah keneged kulam, and again, Talmud Torah, and this is what Rambam's, this connects us to what Rambam was saying about Talmud Torah keneged kulam. And then you have this statement in the Tosefta and the Talmud Yerushalmi in Pe'ah, where it says, "Uchanagdam arba'a dvarim shehem nifra'im min ha'adam ba'olam hazeh." and Rambam said, the Braita says, in other words, he will be punished in this world and the next world, but the main punishment is stored up for Olam Haba. ולשון הרע כנגד כולם. We continue. ועוד אמרו חכמים. You should be able to see this on the screen. ועוד אמרו חכמים, כל המספר בלשון הרע כאילו כפר בעיקר. It is as if a person who speaks Lashon HaRa, there is a certain similarity or a certain relationship between that and lack of faith in Hashem, of denying Hashem's existence. Shenemar asher omru, those who say, Lilashonenu navbir, sefathenu itanu, mi adon lanu. You see the pasuk in Tehillim, that perek in Tehillim, perek Yud Bet, is discussing evildoers, Rashaim of different sorts, different types. These people say, so the pasuk describes their behavior and their mindset, describes them as people who say, we have the power of our tongues, of our mouths, we can create and engineer reality as we wish. Safatheno itano, we have this power, and mi adon lanu, who is master over us? Who can tell us what to do? We can achieve our aims simply by the power of speech. We can tell lies. We can what is called today in politics, spin doctors, how to present facts in a disingenuous way, even though they may be facts. But you add or detract something, or you express it in a certain way. We all know about the power of the choice of words that one uses. In general, this isur of Lashon HaRa and everything related to it has everything to do with the power of human speech. Human speech, of course, is the ability of human beings to speak. I will show you, we'll mention this pasuk here, the Targum. Here we have Perek Bet in Sefer Bereshit. You can see this on the screen, I imagine. Perek Bet, pasuk Zayin. ويثر أدوناي ألوهيم ألف أدم عفار منه أدما ويباح بأبو نشمات حيم. Hashem breathed into his creation, the spirit of life, Nishmat Hayim. Targum Onkelos says Nishmata the Hayeh. ويهي هأدم لنفش حياة. The Targum says famously, وهواف بأدم لروح ممللا. The essence of human existence is expressed in the real world and is evident in the real world by the power of speech, the faculty of speech. And that means that we must consider every word that leaves our mouths to be of great significance, and it can be. Words can achieve much, and both much in the realm of good and that which is good and proper and beneficial, and much, unfortunately, in the realm of evil and other many things which are anything but good and proper. And a human being who defiles this God-given faculty of speech, is that fact alone is a terribly serious indictment of a human being. Rather than using the power of speech for the good, which is what it was designed for, using it for the opposite is a terrible sin, and it is the opposite of the true essence of a human being. The true essence of being a human being is to be a nefesh haya, in other words, a sentient, intelligent being with understanding, with the power to communicate wisdom and spread that which is good and correct, and be a ruach malala, a creature which can express its inner thoughts in verbal form, in audible form. Taking that and turning it into the opposite is sinful, particularly sinful, precisely because it is misusing this divine gift. So we continue. Rambam says, that's over here. You should be able to see this. Lashon HaRa Lashon HaRa kills three people. Ha'amero, he who speaks it. V'ha'mekadbelo, and he who hears it and receives it, accepts it. V'zeh she'omerim alo, and the person being spoken of. V'ha'mekadbelo, say Chachamim, yafer min ha'amero. So first of all, what does the statement of the Chachamim mean? It does not always lead to bloodshed, but it can, as we have seen, as we mentioned. Now, the Hamekabel is he who hears what this other person is relating and accepts it as true. He hears and is mekabel. He accepts that this is the truth. And he who accepts such information is being over on the isur also lo tisa shemasho, and that isur also is also being transgressed by the person speaking Lashon HaRa. Rambam in his Perush on the Mishneh Masechet Avot Rambam in his Perush on Masechet Avot Perek Rishon Halachat Tet Zayin, Rambam discusses at length the various types of speech in which a person can engage. This Rambam relates here says in relation to what the Mishneh states. Shimon beno omer kol yomai gadalti ben hachachamim v'lo masati laguf tov ela shetikra. That having been raised amongst hachamim, I learned from them and I saw that silence is one of the very best things that one can achieve, one can aim for, one can aspire to. And then Rambam goes on to dissect the different types of speech that a person can involve themselves in. Rambam writes, there are 4 categories. The first category, he says, is dibur shehu kulo nezek beli shum to'elet. The first type of speech is that which a person utters, which has absolutely no positive value or outcome. It is entirely negative in nature, such as cursing other people or speaking in a vulgar fashion, etc. The second type of speech Rambam discusses here, sheyesh bo nezek mitzad echad v'to'eret mitzad acher. On the one hand, it is positive, but it also has a downside, such as Rambam says, "L'shabach adam kedei lehanot mimeno." You praise a person in the ears of others in order that you will somehow gain some benefit from this, or in order to upset he who hates that person that you are praising. They will not be able to bear the fact that you are praising this person that they cannot stand. And this causes the person you are praising to be harmed, because then this other person who hates him, who dislikes him at least, will dislike him even more. So it is correct in that situation not to praise him. A third kind of speech, Rambam says, is a dibur she'en bo to'elet v'lo nezek. It has neither an upside or a downside, such as the various stories and schmoozing that most people engage in. Stam, as Rambam says, Kivon rov sipurehe hamon, what most people talk about most of the time. Things that are unnecessary and do not really benefit anybody. And there are, excuse me, and there is a fourth category of speech, says Rambam, Devarim shekulam to'elet kechol hadibur b'mada'im u'v'ma'alot, speaking about wisdom and knowledge and ethics, and also discussing things and discussing and learning and informing others about things that are necessary for existence, for life. So he quotes a certain Chacham. He quotes this in the name of Sefer Hamidot. This is apparently some Arabic book of ethics that was well known, and Rambam was quoting from it. And he quotes a wise man as saying, of all these 4 categories of speech, I examine all types of speech and all things that one might say, but I only utter them if I find it to be of the 4th category. The others, I simply don't say. I don't say anything at all. That's what Rambam quotes from an Arabic book of ethics. But then Rambam goes on to say, Wani omer, and I say as follows, Ki hadibur nechlak lefi havav torafenu hamisha halakim. There are actually 5 categories of speech, says Rambam. Misuwebo, umuzhar alo, umuruhak, urasui, urashut. In other words, things that you are required to say. That there is a mitzvah that you say these things, utter these things. There are things that you are commanded not to utter. Umiruhak, there are things which are considered unseemly and improper. You should not discuss them. Urasui, there are things which are the opposite, which are desirable and commendable and desirable. Urashuth, and those things which are none of the above, are just speech which has none of these qualities about it. So Rambam gives examples. He says, "Hahelik the first category, which is mesuwebel, that which we are commanded to do, to say, is things such as kriyat Torah or kriyat Shema, studying Torah and discussing it with others, as the pasuk says, with Ibar Tabam." That is the first category. Mesuwe, that which is commanded. Wahelik hasheni huwa dibur asher ne'esar u'huzhanu alo. And there are types of speech which we are commanded not to utter, such as edut sheker, to give false testimony in a beth din. That's obviously asur. And then Rambam goes on to say, speaking hakazav, to lie, warechiluth, waharigul, wahagidufim. So Rambam, he mentions what we've been discussing now, rechiluth and rigul, all manner of being a tattletale, being a spreader of rumors, of information, stories. And included in this, Rambam says, is nivluth hapeh, which is speaking in a vulgar fashion, Lashon HaRa, and speaking ill of others, where it is not justified or necessary. Those are the first two, Hamasaweh and the Muzhar, that which we are commanded to do and that which we are commanded not to say, not to do. Ahelik HaShalishi, the third category, Rambam says, Hua Dibur Hamiruhak. This refers to speech which is considered improper. Which is most of what most people speak about and read about most of the time, says Rambam. Telling people stories and information about things they don't really need to know. And this, Rambam says, is referred to by the Chachamim as siha b'tala, empty talk. Batel. In other words, it's not explicitly asur. It's not Lashon HaRa. It's not edut sheker. It's not a lie. But it is of no value. Siha b'tala. Wa hasidim mishtadalim me'od litrachek midavarim elu, Rambam says. And those who wish to refine their behavior and be closer to Hashem and achieve a high level of kedusha, distance themselves from such talk as much as possible. And Rambam quotes what it states in the Talmud, although the Girsah that we have in the Talmud is slightly different. Rambam quotes it here as follows: Omeru Rav Talmidosh Rabbi Hiya, the famous Rav Rabbi Abba, the Talmud of Rabbi Hiya, who also learned from Rabbeinu HaKadosh. Shelo sah simcha b'tela miyamav. He was not heard speaking a simcha b'tela ever. Again, why would a person behave in such a way? Why would a person be so pedantic, so cautious about speaking, about saying things which are not asur? Precisely for the reason that we said before, because he recognizes, he feels in every fiber of his being that the faculty of speech is kadosh, it is holy, it has to be used only in the right and proper fashion for the right purposes. And he also knows what we're going to mention in a moment, that unnecessary speech almost always inexorably leads to that which is not just unnecessary, but also asur. The fourth category, Rambam says, of the five that he says he will mention here, is that which is considered desirable and proper, which is Sheva HaMa'aloth and Genuth HaMigra'oth, speaking and praising and explaining why such and such is a good form of behavior and proper midah to adopt, and why other things are not desirable and improper. So that this can be done, of course, by speaking, by learning, by teaching, by speaking in a public fashion to a large audience, giving a shiur about such things. It can also be done, Rambam says here, it can be done also by way of poetry or song. So, for instance, singing Zemiroth on Shabbat, which have positive content, which speak about things that benefit people spiritually, ideologically, etc. That is included in this fourth helik of dibur, which is rasui. There's no chova to sing a particular zemer, or to sing any zemer for that matter, but there is good reason to do so. And Rambam adds here another example of this category of desirable and beneficial speech is Sheva HaChachamim, speaking and praising the Chachamim and that which they said and did, with Sipur HaShivut Ma'alotehem, and relating about their midoth and their behavior towards others, and speaking also speaking ill of the evil doers. Just as it is a mitzvah to speak well of the Chachamim and those who represent the Torah, those who study the Torah and spread the Torah and knowledge of Hashem, in order to encourage people to follow in their footsteps. So it is Rathui. Rambam says this is part of the fourth chelik, the Rathui, the desirable, the correct, the beneficial type of speech. L'ganot et rashaim, to speak ill of the evildoers and their behavior and their midoth and their motivations. Why? In order, says Rambam, to cause people to be disgusted and feel aversion in relation to these people and their behavior, their actions, their way of life, their aspirations. So people will separate themselves from them and will not follow in their footsteps. And that's exactly why it says in Bereshit Rabbah, for example, that he who mentions the name of the tzaddik must, who is no longer with us, must say Zecher Tzaddik Livracha, because that is exactly an example of this type of dibur, which is rasui, which is beneficial and proper. And he who mentions a Rasha must say, after mentioning his name, Shem Rashaim Yirkav, may the name of the evildoers rot. Some people, for whatever reason, are squeamish about the second half of this Hora'ah Mefureshet, this explicit instruction of Chazal. They find it somehow improper when someone mentions the evildoers and adds such epithets. But as we see here, Rambam does not believe such a thing, and Chazal did not think such a thing. In this world in which we find ourselves, there is good and there is evil. There are good people who do good and people who do evil. That is a reality. The people who claim that you should see only the good and not be aware of the evil and not take it to heart and not, as it were, not notice it, pretend that it's not there. That is not a true Torah attitude. That is not.
Rabbi?
That is, just one second. This is not what common sense dictates. It is not what we see throughout the Tanakh, what we see Chazal saying and doing all the time when they speak well and praise the Tzaddikim, the Hachamim, and they do the opposite with regards to the evildoers. That is a true Torah hashkafa, a true attitude, a Torah-based attitude. Yes, question.
It seems that in certain religious quarters, they've taken the squeamishness and institutionalized it into a philosophy which refuses to talk about anything but loving one's fellow Jew and refuses to speak about various evil actors and forces.
Yes, I am aware of this, and that is precisely why I mentioned this fact. This is not an attitude. This is not a modus operandi which is based on basic fundamental Torah values. The fact that a certain Hasidic Rebbe or teacher made a certain statement in a certain situation or with certain kinds of situations or people in mind, how to relate to negative phenomena in this world. There is value in such a teaching in given situations, but this is precisely the point. You have to be knowledgeable and wise yourself to know when it is correct and even mutar to behave in that way, and not point out and not make known the evil or the negative ramifications of what certain people say and do. And we see clearly from the Rambam here that this is his position. This is based entirely on what Chazal, all of these statements, all these 5 categories that Rambam is discussing are based on explicit statements of the Chachamim. The fifth category, Achelik HaHamishi, Rambam says, Hu Reshut. هو الدبور بمش نوضع لأدم بمسحره وفانسته ومأخله. In other words, speaking about things which need to be discussed because a person has to survive and has to conduct his business affairs. So he cannot conduct his affairs. He cannot, for example, be a trader without speaking to the people with whom he trades. So it's not a mitzvah, but it's definitely reshut, it's definitely permissible, and it's necessary. And this kind of reshut, says Rambam, this kind of speech, and then lo rasui v'lo meruhak, it is neither encouraged or discouraged. Ela im rasa rasai ledaber bo kama she'yirtzeh. If necessary, a person can speak about these things as much as is required. And if he wishes, yishtok, and if he wishes to be silent and say little or nothing, he can do this. He can do so. However, Rambam adds, "Uvehelik hazeh nivhar la'adam mi'ot hadibur." But the correct approach is to keep such speech to a minimum. Now Rambam adds, he says, that which is mustaweh, that which we are commanded to do, to speak. Again, limud Torah, miswot which involves speech, such as kriyat shema or tefillah, and that which is rasui, that which is encouraged and considered proper and beneficial. If a person can speak only about these things, or almost entirely about these things, all his life, this is the ultimate achievement, and that should be a person's aim. However, Rambam says you need to know two things with regards to this. האחד, שיהיו מעשיו מתאימים לדברים, כמו שאומרים, נעים דברים היוצאים מפי עושיהם. A person has to ensure that he is na'eh doresh or na'eh mekayem. If he speaks and praises that which is good and proper, he has to be very careful that and particular that he himself lives up to these standards and these ideas. If not, then it will cause a Hilul Hashem. And with regards to this, and this is what we find in this Mishneh here at the end of the first Perek of Masechet Avot, Shimon ben Rabban Gamliel is the Hacham speaking here. After he speaks about Lo Matzati Laguf Tov Ela Shetika, I found nothing more beneficial than being silent. V'lo hamidrash hu ha'ikar ela ha'ma'aseh. But it is not speaking about that which is good, which is the main thing. It is actually living it. Talking the talk is important. Walking the walk is even more important. So, with regards to speaking, relating, teaching, admonishing others, instructing others, one has to be careful that all this positive speech that he is uttering, that he himself lives up to it. And the second thing Rambam says, the second thing is to be brief. Brevity is of great value. To say much that is correct and true, as briefly, as concisely as possible. Not the opposite. And this is what we find Chazal saying, a person should always adopt a manner of teaching his students, which is a derech kesara, which is brief, which is to the point, and not doesn't ramble and waffle. Rambam goes on to discuss music and songs with words. We won't read that section now. We'll complete what one more statement here in the Rambam. Halacha Hey or Daled. Should be able to see it now on the screen. Rambam says here, V'yesh sham devarim, and there are things, shehem, there is a kind of speech, shehem avak Lashon HaRa, literally, the dust of Lashon HaRa. In other words, a very minor form of Lashon HaRa, just as let's say the person was walking in a very dusty area, so his shoes are covered in dust. If he walks into a clean room, shall we say, with those shoes, then a very small amount of that dust will find its way onto the floor. So it can be very small, but it's nevertheless noticeable. It's real. And Chazal referred to this kind of Lashon HaRa, which is a very low grade Lashon HaRa, shall we say, very minor. And the Rambam refers to this in his Pirush on the Mishneh, where we were just discussing. He says this is a harhaka This is almost an extreme in the positive sense. Extremely cautious approach to Lashon Hara, to distance oneself from any type or any form of Lashon Hara. Yesham devarim shem avak Lashon Hara. Kesat, for example, Mi omar lifloni sheyeh kamot shehu ata. If a person says about someone else, who would have believed that so and so would achieve this level or be like he is today? What will result from such a statement? Immediately people want to know, what do you mean? How was he before? Now you're saying he's wonderful, but you're implying that there's something else was the case in the past. So this will naturally draw people into a discussion of his past, how he was different in the past, etc. And this will involve Lashon Hara. Or Oshiyomar shitkumi peloni eni rose lehodia ma'ira umehaya. Or when speaking about someone, he says, don't talk about such a person. I don't want to speak about that person because I don't want to relate what happened and what he did, what he said, or what someone said. I don't want to talk about that. So without actually saying anything, you clearly implied that there is something there to be told, to know, of a negative nature, without actually stating it, hinting at it. That is called avak lashon hara. And similarly, hamasaper b'tovat havero bifnei sona'o. He who speaks well, who praises a person in the hearing of those who dislike this person for whatever reason. Harez avak lashon hara. This is also a kind of lashon hara. Why? Because this is almost forcing them to do the opposite. They cannot bear to hear this person being praised. It bothers them so much, they must somehow, as a countermeasure to balance things out, they have to say something negative. So you're causing other people to speak Lashon Hara. With regards to such things, Shlomo says in Sefer Mishneh, Mevarech ra'ehu b'kol gadol b'boker hashkem kalala tehashev lo shemitoch tovatho v'alideh ra'atho. In other words, he who goes out of his way to, it says b'boker in the pasuk, b'boker hashkem, which means very early in the morning, which is when people are still just waking up and getting up. If you say in a very loud voice outside, people will hear what you're saying. Who will hear what is you're saying? He who says something positive about a person in a loud voice where everyone can hear. Both those who like him and think well of him and those who cannot stand him will hear what you're saying. So it's like speaking before those who dislike him, because there must be some such person out there, or it's likely to be. So one has to be circumspect in what one says, when one says it, where one says it, in front of whom. Even though you're praising, you're actually bringing and causing Lashon Hara and the opposite to exist in the world. We shall stop here for today. These are very important concepts, and I stress once again, those who like to speak, those who say "Mi adon lanu," who is our master, who can tell us what to do, what to say. We will create the reality and engineer the world as we see fit by the power of our speech. Such people are very, very far from Hashem. And the greatest antidote to such behavior and such thought and such lifestyle is anawah. As we said before, the pasuk discusses both lithim and anawim in the same breath as two opposites. So anawa leads to a person being aware, self-aware, being aware of the fact that he is far from perfect, and therefore he should perhaps be less judgmental about others, and he certainly should not find pleasure in discussing the shortcomings of others. That can only be the pastime, the habit, the hobby of someone who is lacking anawah, lacking yirat shamayim. And the nezek, the damage of such behavior is very great and sometimes beyond computation. Hizku v'yames levavchem kol ha'mei halim Adonai hayu beruchim. Shalom.
Thank you, Rabbi Bar-Hayim. We would like to encourage our viewers to share these videos with friends and send in your responses. We would also like to suggest the following opportunity to our viewers. If you identify with Rabbi Bar-Hayim's message and would like to sponsor or dedicate a video interview with the rabbi in honor or memory of a loved one, if you would like to obtain Birkon Nusach Eretz Yisrael or invite the rabbi for a speaking engagement, please email us at office@machonshilo.org.